So session one, we've got starting a little early, so hopefully that's okay, Ruth. We have grazing cover crops. I'm going to do a little introduction for Ruth, and then it will be your turn. So Ruth farms with her husband Sid near Scribner, Nebraska, on land that has been in her family since it was homesteaded in 1870, which is very cool. Ruth and Sid have a no-till operation growing soybeans, corn, alfalfa, and incorporating cover crops. The cover crops are fed to their small herd of shorthorn cows, and she is here today to talk to us about grazing cover crops. So, Ruth, I will turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Beth, and welcome everybody. Yes, my husband and I have farmed here for about 38 years. We've been continuous no-till for about the last 25 years. And really started into the whole cover crop thing as a part of soil health. We were raising some seed corn for a local seed corn producer here. And my husband, who's a soil scientist by education and training, had been reading about increasing biomass basically on your crop ground. And our first venture into cover crops was sending our oldest son up and down the male rows of the seed corn with a little fertilizer spreader full of turnip seed. And our seed corn was under irrigation, so we knew we could water up the turnips. It was all an effort just to get more plant material out there that could add to that soil and add to the soil health. About 14 years ago, we got back into the cow business. My father had always had cows and had some pasture. And if you're familiar with the east central part of Nebraska, you know that if there was any way for it to grow something besides pasture in the last 60 years, it has. There's very little out here that if it didn't have any sort of limiting factor, that it was old creek bed or it was too wooded or it was maybe a little too wet in places or just terrible rough ground, it's had row crop put on it. So pasture is very limiting factor if you're a cow producer here. And so we are definitely in the country of the cornstalk cowboy. And Beth, I think you've got a picture of our cows on cornstalks. This is pretty typical of, from November 1st till, we need to get them off in the spring. So as we're out there with that cornstalk cowboy thing, we end up with gaps in when we have cows able to graze. We started looking into cover crops and realized that may give us a little bit of leeway on grazing for our cows. We do have hay ground, we have alfalfa, but with our management style, if we can let those cows harvest it themselves rather than us having to harvest, having to feed, all the things that go with that, we're a lot happier. Now, we did find out there were some trade-offs for labor, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but so the early grazing in April, when we want to have those cows off the corn stalks, and then the late summer, early fall grazing, September, first part of October, before any corn stalks are ready, was always kind of a gap for us. So we decided let's take a look at cover crops. We've gone with mostly a turnip and rye type of crop choice for cover crops. It works well for us. And that's the thing I would encourage everybody is that experiment, try it out, see what works for you, because what works for us where we're at may not work for somebody else even 2 miles away. Our management style, our labor availability, whatever it is, all those things come into what you can do for cover crops. Beth, if you want to put up the picture of the newly turned in cows on the rye, I referred to some of the labor trade-offs we talked about. Because cows are pretty inefficient grazers, one of the labor trade-offs that you get is that you get real used to fencing. Our cows are well trained to electric fence. Um, and we end up moving electric fence here. We've just turned some in. In the foreground, you can see where they've grazed some before this, but to encourage them to make efficient use, you give them a little bit, make them graze it all off, and then move them on. Let's go to the other picture, Beth, of the two that are laying down in what's been grazed. Here you can see they do a pretty good job of cleaning it all up. Our cover crops tended to go in after soybeans just because of our labor and our management style. That sometimes makes it a little tricky if we rotate then the following year to corn. They talk about a little bit of allelopathy with the rye and the corn germination. We've not seen any problems with that. The one problem we did have one year when we rotated out of our rye, I want to say that was 2012 when we didn't get any moisture. And so where you had rye, if you weren't under irrigation, you definitely had depleted some soil moisture. It doesn't happen often. It happened that year because of the extreme conditions. 2 years ago, we only had turnips in the fall. And so when that was a dry year, that following spring, that didn't affect us too much. So the rye will come in the spring. And the other thing I encourage people, if they use rye, is be ready to graze before you think you're ready to graze, because that rye will come on fast, get big, and cows like it soft and tender. And so if it starts to thinking about putting a head on, they'll ignore it for quite a while, unless you really force them to eat it. The turnips tend to be our fall gap filler for grazing. Typically, we will scatter turnip seed out sometime right about now. There's that old saying they always talked about, hot or dry on the 26th of July, you're supposed to sow your turnips. We tend to hit that somewhere between the 26th of July and the 10th of August. We'll get some turnip seed out there. Last year was kind of a bust because we did not get the moisture that we thought we were going to get. So that was a little shorter grazing. And we have the flexibility to do that because we do have a hay crop. We aren't completely reliant on the cover crops to provide feed for our cows. That's the other thing. Again, it has to fit your management style. The other part of that is that I've been amazed at cows grazing turnips. We had an early frost one fall, and they even loved it after it had died. They licked up every leaf bit and pulled up every turnip out of the ground and ate every single bit of it. So our grazing, we don't have a large cow herd, but they're pretty efficient grazers. Helps us get an extra 3 weeks to a month of grazing when we use these cover crops. The other thing that I would encourage you with cover crops is if you have maybe a wet area or an oxbow. We farm some creek bottom ground. So there have been, creek bed movements. And so we have some old oxbows that show up. Somewhere before we got livestock, we went out just using cover crops and went into those oxbow areas and seeded them to some cover crop mixes. At that time, we used more radish in our cover crop mix. And I've talked with my husband Sid about this. We are quite convinced that that cover crop in that oxbow area, in those low areas that were always pretty wet and remained wet in especially a year like this, where we've had rain about every week, it changed that soil structure enough, allowed that soil to have better water infiltration. And instead of driving through those low oxbows and saying, well, not too many weeds here, we actually have crop all through those oxbows. So that's another place where I've found cover crops to be really beneficial. And it's, as I think about cover crops and as I thought about this presentation, cover crops are kind of fiddly. they're they're not throw it in the planter and run over hundreds of acres. A lot of times you've got to be willing to do maybe a little here, a little there, and then piece things together. Our operation is a size where that works for us. Again, you have to know what fits your management style. So we I don't know what else to say about it. The cattle love it. We like the management of it. Yes, we have to fence more, but that's usually, not a terrible job. And as long as your electric fence is working, we're all good. So I don't know, are there any questions or what,
Can you talk about the type of cows, how many,
right,
how long you might graze them on a certain size of land?
right. Okay. So our cow herd is fairly small. We're about 30 cows. Because as I've said, our summertime pasture is limited because it's, whatever couldn't be put into corn, soybeans, or alfalfa. So it's our summertime pasture that limits our size and what we choose to manage. Along with farming, my husband also teaches high school science. And so sometimes labor is a limiting factor. So we've got about 30 cows. And in general, what we would do with the rye in the spring is we would turn everybody out and we would calve on that rye also, which is also a lovely surface to calve on because it's clean, it's fresh, it's green. Um, just a really nice place to calve. And we'd probably go out there, I would say, second week of April. And um, we we tend to run somewhere between 10 and 15 acres of rye, depending on how the rotation works and how things come out. And 10 to 15 acres of rye is actually too much for the number of cows we have. We could probably put I'd say another 10 to 15 cows on that for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. Again, we make them graze it down like this picture shows before we let them have anything else. Otherwise, that cows are notorious. They'll walk on half of it, eat half of it, ignore, that's too many halves, but they'll ignore some of it too. So, and then the turnips in the fall, I would say we're probably on those. Oh, probably the third week of September. And that we generally only have about 5 to 6 acres of those for the number of cows we have. And a lot of that just depends on how well the turnips have grown. One year we were able to get nearly a month out of it because the turnips had done exceptionally well. We had turnips that were approaching volleyball size. And so they stayed on them for a long time. When we do have turnips, we will have alfalfa hay, free choice for them as well. They do a little ration balancing that way. But yeah, they'll go through, take all the tops off, and then come back and pull up all the turnips and munch away on all the turnip roots. And so I think we got at least a solid 3 weeks, which for us was okay. So
Do you have any, did you keep any data over how much you've saved in feed versus, grazing them on the cover crops or supplementing?
we didn't, take actual numbers of anything, but because of some years when the hay crop was significantly shorter than it is this year, we know that we definitely would have run out of hay by the following spring turnout to pasture had we not had cover crops. I would say, it's saving us. Well, when I figured out if our cows generally, if they're strictly on hay, will go through 2 bales a bale a day of about a 1,500 pound bale of alfalfa. They'll go through one bale per day. So if we were getting 3 weeks, what we got then 21 to 25 bales that we're saving that, if the, because we do supplement our corn stalks also in case, if we have snow cover where they aren't able to get through. And I always get a little nervous because I don't want anybody hungry out there. So
Okay, that seems like a good amount of savings
yeah,
for
yeah.
having those cover crops.
And in the
There,
fall, when we got turnips, we also have the calves on the cows yet.
okay,
And so it's, again, we're calving on the rye in the spring, and then we've got the calves yet on the cows in the fall because we typically don't wean till we move to corn stalks.
okay, okay. I do have a question related to that from someone in the audience. What time of year do you calve? And he said where, and you mentioned the rye field.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So what time of year is that, and any
We
other calving information?
right. We try to hit late March and then through April, and confine it to about 6 weeks in that time frame. So we'll start mid March, and then hopefully we're wrapped up by about May 1st. And doesn't always work, as anybody knows, but and that it seems to work well for us. And for on the rye, like I say, it's a great calving surface. You have a whole lot less disease pressure because you've got a more diversified, you know, base of stuff out there. You're not in a dry lot. Sometimes you can have a concentration of manure, which exacerbates some scour issues and things like that. But it really is a good surface to calve on. So
Okay. Someone else was asking, is the field rough after the cows pull up the turnips?
nope, nope, because then we're going through the freeze thaw cycle after they're done grazing. And I talked to somebody one time that they said, well, what if you have any turnips left out there? Is it a problem to plant into? And this year, because we had kind of a crop failure on our turnips in the one place because it was too dry, we were out planting into the field where the turnips had been because they were really sparse, and it was a tough piece of ground anyway. I'm not sure even with rain we would have gotten it had been an old cattle yard is what it was. And so it was some areas where water had stood, various things like that. So our turnip crop was kind of cruddy, and we just went out and planted no-till into that, and no issues. We're big proponents of making sure that our True V openers are very sharp. So they cut through everything, but it was absolutely no problem cutting through any sort of turnip residue. And there really isn't much. Turnips get pretty mushy once they've been frozen, and they kind of disintegrate, but they do amazing things for your soil health. I'm convinced that they provide a place for all that microbiome, whether it be earthworms or other insects or other bacterial based decomposers. Just gives them a lot of place to be. And I find the organic matter, they our no-till, I asked my husband this for sure before this presentation, the no-till, and not necessarily the cover crops, but the no-till itself has helped us raise our organic matter in our topsoil by about a percentage, which really is pretty amazing because you don't build organic matter easily. It takes a long time. And we're sure that our water holding capacity is better. We know our water infiltration is dramatically better. We're on a lot of silty clay loams, some clay loam. If anybody's familiar with the soil type Zook, Zook is a lowland soil type, more aptly named Gook, because if it gets wet, it gets this really blocky structure that is miserable. So.
Okay. So we have a question about fencing. Do you use electric fence? And then how do you water the cows?
Yeah, we're all a smooth wire electric fence, single strand. They're pretty well trained. Um, we tend to have the ability where we graze to be able to make it in that kind of wagon wheel pattern so they can always access kind of the same. So we do have a little bit of abused ground because of course they're always walking on the same area to get back to water tank.
Hmm.
But where the water tank sits on most of what we graze is right up next to our one main cattle working building. So it's not like it's prime real estate anyway. I mean, it's where they're going to stand anyway. And we're able to get them to funnel into that and up to water. So we do a lot of water tank and garden hose running. That's why we, you know, always hopeful that we don't have to drain any garden hoses in April, that it won't freeze. But I've drained a lot of garden hoses in my life. So
Oh my goodness, a lot of challenges, a lot of challenges. We have a question about and I'll share my screen again. The graze, the red cows that are in the rye,
mhm.
there's something higher behind them. Let me pull it up here. So the question was, what is the tall stuff in the background?
Weeds.
And oh, okay. So just weeds. So no worries about
Yeah.
keeping them out or all right.
No, that's our alleyway that leads to our one pasture. And we had wanted to put that into cover crop. And here again, it was a labor thing. We didn't get the fence pulled at the time. And so it's got good old whatever, well, lots of mustard that spring. So,
Do
excuse
cows
me
eat
just
the
a moment. I have a
mustard?
very adamant dog that wants in my door and she's kind
Oh,
of
you're fine. You are fine. So we'll get to some of these. I see questions in the chat as well. So if you would mind, we'll get to those ones, but for future questions, please put them in the Q&A. So from our chat, someone wrote, we're a vineyard. We're going to start implementing more grazing and biodynamic practices for weed control. So she wasn't sure, they weren't sure, sorry, if turnips would work since they don't graze cattle, but could they utilize rye and radish for smaller and less damaging animals like sheep? Do you have any knowledge on sheep grazing?
I don't have a lot of knowledge on that. And um, that'd be something to talk to people who have more experience with sheep. I know the big thing with our turnips, if and with the cows, is that we need to make sure that they're bigger than baseball size.
Hmm.
The bulbs are, because cows will try to swallow the whole thing. And if you've ever watched some of the vets up in Canada where they're grazing sugar beets and things like that, every once in a while you have a vet out there pulling a whole sugar beet out of somebody's airway so they don't choke. But I don't have a lot of experience with sheep grazing or what. I would think that they would be very good grazers, all keeping in mind that sheep, because they have two sets of teeth, are going to actually bite whatever crop it is off. Cows only have that bottom set, so they pull things. And so that makes that, and that's why they're good with turnips, because they're naturally pulling things out of the ground. That's why certain grass crops don't work great for grazing, because they end up uprooting them and they don't grow
Hmm.
back. So that's some of the thing, but I'd find somebody who understands sheep grazing much better than I. That's not me.
Okay. What is the next experiment that has you excited to test out on your farm?
Um, hmm. Well, I would really like to be able to get into some more abused areas where we could get some cover crop. Um, and that's kind of the thing that I'd like to get into is places where we do have some old cattle yards, and it grows a great crop of buffalo burr and velvet leaf,
Hmm.
things like that. Again, it turns into, for us, the big issue is labor. um, I do some of it, I don't do all of it. With my husband going back to school, he goes back to school already next week, then the labor availability declines rapidly. um, uh, I wish I was a little bit better at working with some of the machinery than I am, but it's the division of labor we've got, and we learn to work with it. So yeah, getting some of those abused areas and getting them to grow something besides, the typical weeds of eastern Nebraska. So.
Okay. Do you happen to know how many years of no-till it took to improve the organic matter? Was that a visual assessment? Did you actually have it tested to
Soil
see?
tests,
Okay.
soil tests. So we had, we soil test on a regular basis. Pull soil test cores and send them into the lab every year. And I would say that we started noticing an improvement with organic matter probably about year 10. And it was, as I say, it's a slow process. Before year 10, we were noticing things like the water infiltration rate. I was talking about that soil type Zook. It was a very typical soil that if you had, say, a heavy rain event, it sealed up and ponded, and you had a water hole. In the 25 years we've had this going, our water hole area has decreased dramatically. And a lot of it has to do with increased infiltration that we noticed within the first 3 years of no-till. It's gotten better. It's gotten more so over the duration, but the water infiltration was the first thing. Yeah, the organic matter, I think by year 10 to 12, we were noticing some improvement, and then it really, has, we certainly haven't lost any. And I think, yes, I think it was just last year's soil test that we compared to before the no-till. So that's, 25 years. But it's a long-term investment.
Yeah, it took, 100 years for us to lose organic matter. So
Right.
it's going to take a bit of that to gain it back. So
Right.
that's awesome. So another question, do you fertilize or apply pesticides on your cover crops?
No. And we're hopeful with some of this rye that it's a little bit of a scavenger if there is any nitrogen left. A lot of times our rye is next to this creek that we have, and so we're hopeful that rye is scavenging whatever might be left out there. I mean, yes, we have followed soybeans frequently. We have followed corn occasionally. So hopefully it's taken some of that so it can't, get into the water system in any way. But no pesticides, no herbicides of any type. So.
Okay. Are there any, oh, we have another one coming up here. Do you have any certifications for your fields or products? If you want to answer that one first, and I'll continue.
No, we have never pursued anything as far as certified organic or certified whatever it might be. We've just mostly done it for us, and for the soil health. We just could see so many benefits. The other part of it is that the no-till, we're a little cheap. We don't like spending diesel fuel if we don't have to. And then again, the labor thing. So my husband didn't start teaching school until about 20 years ago, which kind of coincided with the no-till thing, because, again, I do some of the machine work, but plopping me out there on a disc or a field cultivator, I was still raising small children at the time. I was a stay-at-home mom the entire time. And we just found that between the labor and the fuel and the machinery expense, that was the big thing with no-till. Just, and in the dry years, the moisture we did save because we did not turn that soil. We use herbicides. We would probably not be able to do the no-till we do if we didn't have some of the herbicide tools we have available. We're very judicious with their use. If we don't have the weeds out there, we're not going to go out there and just put something out because, just because it's there. You think it might be there. We do a lot of scouting. My husband and I both are agronomists, and we had our own field scouting business for about 25 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
we spend a lot of time walking fields and looking, and I'm a big proponent of finding economic thresholds. We don't talk about those a lot anymore when we treat for certain things, but our experience was through the pre-genetic with the BT and the corn. We used to scout for corn borer all the time. And so calculating economic thresholds is just something we do. And so even with weed control, economic threshold, fungicides, economic threshold, how many bushels are we saving if we use this? And so that kind of carries over in everything that we do in the cover crop too. What's the economic threshold? What's the payback? We have noticed a decrease in some winter annuals, of
Hmm.
course, where we have that cover crop because there's competition. If we've got rye out there, the hen bit says, "Oh, I can't grow here." Thank goodness. So we don't have that lovely purple field in the spring. So.
Nice. So the second part of this question, and this is a really interesting question. This individual is watching from Brazil. So thank you for tuning in. So they were asking, what is the main driver to continue investing in regenerative practices and cover cropping, such as incentive programs with certification bonuses? So I know different countries have different incentives, and I think it might have been Brazil that didn't have an incentive for grassed waterways, but they have incentives for other things.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm going to pare that down to, are you part of any cost share for your cover crops, any
Not at
programs?
this time. And I've looked at a lot of carbon sequestration programs.
Hmm.
Um, I probably should look a little harder. My my first contact with that, um, because of the size of our farm, the scale of things we were doing them on, the management time required to comply with whatever the list of things was that I needed to do to get paid for doing it, exceeded the value of what they were willing to pay me.
Hmm.
And again, it was a trade-off. It's if we were at a scale where I the paycheck for all of the compliance work I would have to do was worth it, I probably would. But we're not at that scale. Um, the motivation for us is that we are able to manage our entire operation in a way that we find it easier for my husband and I. Um, we know that the soil health is greatly improved. We are not losing soil in any type of erosion situation. Um, Knock on wood, our creek bottom ground has not flooded since 2019.
Oh.
But I know it will again. I mean, it's we've known this ground that's in the bottom down there, not quite since the homesteading days, but most of my life I've known the creek bottom ground, and the floods come around, and you just have to be ready for them. And I really think that in our situation, between the cover crops and the no-till and all the things we're doing, we're in a much better position. Should we get flooded, we will have much less soil displacement and movement. In fact, in 2019, that was the big bomb cyclone flood and everything. We
Hmm.
actually had some soil deposition during that flood
Okay.
because we were not the actively moving water. We were the backup water, and so we actually caught soil from other places, and it all was gathered along that row of crop. It acted like a snow fence to catch that soil drift. So
Ah, very
so that's kind of our
interesting.
payback. We just feel like it's uh, helping our management style and allowing us to improve this soil. I have a letter from my great uncle that he wrote to someone back in 1970 something or other, and he was talking about the fantastic 100 bushel corn yield that he had on this 140 acres that we have. And I know it's not all soil health, but there's a good portion of it. And I would love to be able to have my great uncle come back and say and show him that yield monitor as we go across that 40 acres. I think he'd be stunned. And the
Definitely.
lack of the water hole that he fought his entire life,
Oh
because he also
gosh.
referenced that. Um, in fact, at one time he had planted trees out there in that water hole because he figured that was the best use of it.
Okay.
And I mean, trees are great, um, and he utilized them that way, but we're able to crop it and graze it and all these things. So
Nice. All right, so time for just one or two more questions here. Do you use any oh my goodness, microbial products or mycorrhizal fungi during planting?
no.
Okay, easy enough. So we'll get to the next one. Have the cover crops changed how much dry fertilizer or other practices like nitrogen use or timing?
Have the cover crops changed that? Is that what they're asking?
Yes. Yep. How much fertilizer or other practices that you do on the cropland?
Um, I don't think it's changed dramatically. We do soil test after the cover crop again. Um, we probably end up, since we have followed soybeans occasionally, we probably end up with a little bit of that soybean credit, nitrogen credit. It's a little less. So let's say you typically figure a pound of N per bushel of beans, I think is the rule of thumb. So, if we had a 50 bushel bean yield on some dry land beans, um, you might figure 45 to 50 pounds of N from that. I would say that's maybe dropped off about 10 pounds, something like that. But then again, you also have that nutrient cycling. I mean, it's not very well spread. They're not very uniform. I can't train my cows to cover every piece of this 10 acres with their manure, but it's all right back on there. Distribution's a problem, but
Okay. And I think we're 1 minute over, but real quick, has all of this way you've been treating the land, has it had any effect on the fish in your creek?
I know there are some. We catch catfish out of there regularly.
Okay.
Um, and like I say, I know after heavy rain events, and this year especially, we've had some heavy rain events. There's very little coming off of our land anywhere into that creek. And so I think that's been a big benefit. Because especially when I talked about the organic matter, I mean, what you're losing is that topsoil with the organic matter, right? Well, if we're wanting to build it, we're going to hoard it all. And I think that for us, the big benefit is that soil health is dramatically better. It fits our management style, um, top to bottom for us. And I had, if I should have been a little more ambitious. I thought about going back and finding some aerial maps
Hmm.
that showed the water holes that used to exist in heavy rain events and compare that to what we have now. If I were to say that we've reduced the wet spot water hole issue in the bottom ground by 90%, I think I'm being conservative.
Oh,
It's been that dramatic.
very good. Well, thank you, Ruth. We are at
Yeah.
the end of our time for your presentation. So thank you, and thank you, attendees, for all the wonderful questions that we had.